Dive into Jacksonville's rich history. The Jacksonville Public Library has several events planned to help you celebrate Black History Month. We're going to welcome Jerry Urso, the leading one of those fun events. He is the Grand Historian of the most worshipful Union Grand Lodge of Florida. Welcome to First Coast Living, and you're helping people learn the history of Prince Hall Masons. Tell us about that group.
Well, the Prince Hall Masons started in the early 1700s by some abolitionists named Prince Hall, who was writing letters to the colonial court calling for the abolition of slavery. He was calling for the repeal of fugitive slave laws. So the history of Prince Hall Masonry coincides with the civil rights movement in the United States. Wow, so it has its roots just with the founding of our country. From the founding of our country. Matter of fact, his son is one of the war heroes of the Revolutionary War. And Primus Hall also was the clerk to Secretary, Quartermaster General Timothy Pickering.
Interesting. Okay, and all of those names ringing a bell. So when and why was this group formed? In Florida? Yes. Most of the members were from 4 military units: the 22nd, the 3rd United States Colored, the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, and the Massachusetts 54th from the movie Glory. So these men represented the first unit was the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, which was started by abolitionists. Harriet Tubman was actually a member of that unit. And in his book, Thomas Wentworth Higginson details when he was asked, "What are you teaching the slaves?" And he said, "My white officers aren't here to teach the slaves. We are here to learn from them." And so that unit was made up of mostly runaway slaves or freed slaves from the Union Army. Mm-hmm. And they became one of the most successful units during the Civil War. A matter of fact, the occupation of Jacksonville was part of Abraham Lincoln going full out in recruiting African Americans, because they was able to occupy one of the most southern city at the time. So their success actually led to the formation of all the United States colored troops. Okay, these are some stories I didn't get in my schooling, so that's some very interesting information. And how are the Prince Hall Masons influential here in Jacksonville? Well, so many of them stayed because after the war, they looked at Jacksonville as a place where they spilled their blood. They worked, and there was new opportunities in the South. So 2 of our founding members we have here, Tillman Valentine and Thomas Warren Long, have 2 completely different stories, but they both say. So Thomas Long was actually a slave on Robert's plantation on Beaver Street. He escapes under the cover of darkness. He goes to Yulee and joins the 1st South Carolina Volunteer, where he served with Harriet Tubman. He learned how to read with Susie King Taylor, the first black nurse. And so he becomes a war hero, and he's mentioned many times in the memoirs of Thomas Wentworth Higginson. So when he comes back to Jacksonville, he becomes a city councilman. Then he's elected to the Florida State Senate, where he actually proposes legislation for the first public education platform in the state. So he went from slave to senator. Wow, some very interesting. I love history, so I can't get enough of this. And you said you've been a Freemason 13 years in most West Union Grand Lodge. Counting. And when you tell these stories, is it as eye-opening for others as it is for me and our audience? I think so. My Grand Master, the Honorable Jeffrey G. Jones, and our Grand Worthy Matron, Dr. Tracy Thomas, are the keepers of this history. They're the stewards, and our history is so rich that they've made it incumbent upon our jurisdiction to make sure people know about our history. Some of the most famous African Americans in the state of Florida are from the most worshipful Union Grand Lodge. There is no building in the entire state that connects Black history more than the first most worshipful Union Grand Lodge on 410 Broad Street. The founders of the Civil Rights Movement, J. Douglas Wetmore, was the attorney that desegregated the trolley cars here in Jacksonville in 1905. You have James Weldon Johnson, the first African-American secretary of the NAACP. Wetmore was also one of the founders of the Niagara movement. We had the first congressman, African-American congressman from Florida was Josiah T. Walls, who preferred to be called General Walls because he was the general of the Florida militia. So he was one of our founding members as well. So there was an effort to create a social construct in Florida. So typically, a Masonic lodge was next to a church. So as they built churches, they built Masonic lodges next door. We've had
Some of the greatest writers in history are a member of our Grand Lodge. Zora Neale Hurston, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Thomas H.B. Walker were all members. Daniel Webster Perkins was one of the civil rights attorneys who represented the ancient Egyptian Arabic Order Nobles and Mystic Shrine. And the reason why that case was so important before the Supreme Court, it set a precedent for other African American fraternities that they would have the right to use their literature, regalia, without being sued.
And what do you hope people can take away from this history chat?
Well, one of the things we want to need is that these people's mindset was about education. So every HBCU in the state of Florida has a foundation with the most worshipful Union Grand Lodge. I remember I was asked when I did a lecture, how come African Americans don't have more statues throughout Jacksonville? And I said, my answer was, they do, you just haven't looked. Right. It's called Mother Midway. It's called Mount Zion, historic Mount Zion, Edward Waters College. Their thing was they were erecting edifices to look into the future. And education has always been the key. So that's why our Most Worshipful Union Grand Lodge Foundation is built upon continuing that tradition and giving out scholarships for people to go to schools in the state of Florida.
Well, I can't thank you enough for all the awareness out there and all the education and the history. I could talk to you all day. And of course, for much more on this, you can just head to our website, and that is firstcoastliving.net.